Well, have I got both of the renowned individuals on? I've got Mr. Josh Kanter and Dr. Bill Cosgrove on the line, folks. This is going to be an exciting interview today, ladies and gentlemen, because I'm really proud and honored to have both of these gentlemen joining us today. Welcome to Living and Aging with Pride. And let me say, the two of you look like young bucks.
I don't know how to follow that up, Bill.
Looks
I'll leave
can be
that to you.
deceiving.
And that's exactly. Oh, listen to that. Hey, I'm going to start off with you, Josh. Thank you for being here. I know you're a very busy man. Alliance for a Better Utah. Tell me what that is, because everybody out there wants Utah to be the greatest place on earth. So, what are you doing to make that happen?
Sure. So we actually have two different organizations. I think you know we have Alliance for Better Utah,
Right.
which is really dedicated to two primary functions. One is to hold public officials accountable, and so that's kind of our accountability work. And the second is to press for primarily progressive policies to improve the state and improve living conditions for everybody in the state. And then we have a second organization called the Better Utah Institute that's really dedicated on a much more nonpartisan basis to civic engagement and giving people access to our state government. And so that's kind of at the foundation of what we do.
Well, and I see that there's a major merge there. Is it difficult,
Yeah.
especially in these trying times, to get that conflicted commentary together to where you're talking with the politicians, you're talking about the policy, and instituting a process where you can reshape the thinking, hopefully to implement better policies to make things better? Is that a difficult task for you at this point in time?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's all kinds of conflict, right, that make this that's difficult. I think we often looking at politicians who we have to work with, who then we turn around and have to hold accountable. And so that's difficult. And even understanding what holding accountability really means. In our context, that can mean holding politicians accountable to their votes. It can mean holding politicians accountable to standing up because they got pulled over for a DUI. It can mean holding John Swallow accountable for running the Attorney General's office as a pay to play scheme, which was one of the first things that we did when we got started back in 2011. So there's always a tension, I think, between what may seem to some as partisan activity or activity that would make us persona non grata up at the legislature in particular, and yet then we're still pushing people to think about policies that will help the vast majority of Utahns, and how do we press those policies forward. And I think that we tend to come down on the side of all that, that our primary goal and our primary audience is really the people of Utah, not the politicians. And so if the politicians get mad at us, so be it. That's okay. Um, and that's kind of the way we have to look at it. We don't adopt the same attitude that some organizations do, that have to kind of appease the politicians because they have to work with them. We don't look at that as part of our mission. We look at holding them accountable and really talking directly to the people and giving people access to those politicians, but not us having to compromise our values or our perspective.
I like that because it sounds like you're saying we want to work with you, we will work with you, but we're going to keep you stuck on the premise of what you are elected for, and that is to serve the people and make sure that you're implementing and creating policies that make everybody's life a better place to live in this community. So I can see where you can sit a politician in the corner and say, now, I'm going to tell you something, and it has nothing to do with whether you're a Republican or whether you're a Democrat. It has something to do with what's going to make this engine run smoothly, correctly, and that means benefiting the total community.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think, you go back to obviously strange relationships over the years. I mean, obviously, most of your listeners probably are well familiar with Orrin Hatch and Teddy Kennedy and how close the relationship the two of them had, and yet they disagreed pretty frequently. And I think we look at our role in much that same kind of way, that we can hold politicians accountable. We can have opposite positions, or we can have a dialogue about
Absolutely.
things that are happening, especially in a state like Utah with a super majority in the legislature. They need to hear those different voices. I'd say, if anything, in fairness, we get more pushback from legislators who, once they're mad at us, they stay mad at us. They don't really want to come back
Right.
and talk about something else. But we'll work with anybody. We'll talk with anybody about whatever we think is good policy for the state.
And I'm going to bring you in, Dr. Cosgrove. As an advocate of children and people and things like that, are you facing the same kind of thing? Because I know you're a little more milder than Mr. Kanter is in your approach, but are you finding the same kind of issues that you face when you go up and try to push child advocacy issues forefront? You have to work with the legislators. You have to try to get the things moving. But not only that, you're working with a large body of people who are part of your advocacy group. And do you face the differences in on any of those individuals, how they might choose to approach the same process?
All relationships are easiest seen as a dance, and you have to push a little, and you have to pull a little. And seeing this as a pediatrician, when you're raising a child, you have to be very clear on your discipline. And the easiest phrasing is the phrasing my daughter used raising my grandsons, and that is, "I love you too much to allow you to be naughty." And it separates the relationship from the behavior. And when we're dealing with legislators, we
Right.
want to maintain the relationship, and we want to be nice to them as people, but we want to be very strongly clear about the behavior that we don't like. And you just have to be careful about how you phrase that, so they don't take it personally. And when they push back, you don't take it personally. It's about the behavior. And so again, as a pediatrician, dealing with the behavior is often a challenge.
But isn't it personal? Isn't it personal? I mean, our friends, our family, our comrades, our associates are all being affected by the decisions that these individuals make. And deem many of them make those decisions based upon their affiliation to a particular party or group, or et cetera. It's still personal because it's our lives, it's our friends' lives, it's our families' lives. How do you go up there? Ooh, like there is a special place, and make them understand, look, we can make this better. I mean, a lot of, in my opinion, what we see is the afterthought of these things, and then they have to come back and try to correct it or resurrect it and make it better, when in fact they've got enough information to choose the right process. But many times that process is screwed because the party or this group has an influence on them. I mean, that's a lot of things for you guys to be dealing with. And how does it not become personal?
I'll take a shot at that.
Josh? Okay, go
It
ahead, Doc.
does. We care about the things that are important, and we care as people, and it's very personal. And we care about the people who are our friends and colleagues and our clients and such, who are affected by these policies. And so the passion is about it being personal, but the arguments have to be logical. They have to be beyond the passion. They have to be about how we deal with somebody else's viewpoint, how we deal with, facts and data. And so when we're dealing with the decision makers, we have to, again, separate out the behavior of the decision they make, which we can find fault with, and realize they're humans and are easily hurt if we are come across too strong. So again, it's like disciplining a child. We remind them that we care about them as people, and to help them, we would like to help improve their decision. And so it's both personal and it's impersonal, but it's not warfare. It's how do we get to some level of collegiality so that we together can improve the idea or improve the decision. Josh, what are your thoughts about that?
You want to add to that, Josh?
Sure. I think first of all, you're obviously far more mature than I am, since I'm still stuck on trying to compare being a pediatrician to the legislature and dealing with children. And so,
well, let me put it in a more direct way. When I'm dealing with the legislature and it's contentious and I'm at risk of them hurting my feelings because I in fact do picture them as a 7-year-old who hasn't been hugged enough. And it brings out my humanity and it brings out my compassion for them as people. And I see their decisions as misbehavior. I can still care about them and try to correct the misbehavior.
I'm going to get my.
I think.
Go ahead, Josh. Go ahead.
Yeah, look, I think that's certainly all correct, and I do think it's really important to separate the personal reaction, and as you're saying, right, the logic of the argument and the position, and I do think that's one of the reasons why, at least on the Alliance for Liberty Utah side, we really focus so heavily on talking directly to the people, because there are clearly conversations going on at the legislature that it's easy to say, okay, we can have a disagreement over an economic issue that maybe doesn't have a dramatic impact on a certain group of people or whatever it is, and we can agree to disagree and move on without it becoming super personal. But when we're having conversations around Medicaid expansion or school funding or rights for our brothers and sisters in the LGBT community, or any of these different things that really are much more, I guess, personally charged, it's hard to check those emotions at the door when you see the legislature doing things that hurts by fighting the federal government on Bears Ears, hurts our Native American brothers and sisters, or whether it's doing things that claim to be in the name of religious freedom and hurt the LGBT community. So there are lots of things that are very, very hard, and I think for Alliance for Liberty Utah, at least, part of the way we avoid that is less in dealing with the legislature than, again, going straight to the average or the Utahns who are affected by these policies, and trying to make sure that we can communicate that these policies are in line or not in line with what we would consider Utah values, right? We see that thrown around a lot. What are Utah values?
And that's a whole nother conversation, because that's changed.
Yes,
but I think today, in light of all of the things that are happening, I think most importantly, we are starting to hear about things that we have not put to the forefront of information, et cetera. And I'm going to frame that this way. We've got a large population in the aging community now. It's becoming the majority populace. How do we find support? How do you find support with making sure you're talking about the right things that fit for the mass of people rather than for these little pockets of groups, whether it be the Baptist Church, the Catholic Church, or the LDS Church, or this social group or that social group? And I'll explain further. I look at Black Lives Matter and I go, wow, this is not new to me. My life matters, others' lives matter. But I take on the position that I have been talking about these issues for most of my life. How do we make this a fair and humane community for everybody? And I've been blessed to live in places where there's been a very minimal amount of African Americans, and I've gotten along very well. I know I'm a wonderful human being, got a great smile, and my name is James Brown. But, I've been able to live. And I think the thing that I do, and the doctor pointed this out to me one day, he said, you walk in the room with a smile on your face, yet we know that beyond that smile, there's a concern, there's a disturbance. What do you do, Josh, to get your information to find out what it is you need to be up at the Capitol or forging a process together to make change? How do you get that information? What makes a better Utah? What makes Josh say, this is it? We need to go up there and do something about it.
Well, it's a really big question. I think if I'm understanding where you're heading with it, I would say it's a few different things. I mean, one is I think we really try to keep our ear to the ground and keep ourselves surrounded with people from as far and wide across the state and representing different communities of interest within the state. Um, Look, the reality is another middle-aged white guy, which I am, is not gonna, know what the right answers are for every community across the state, and I would never profess to, unlike some of our friends in the legislature. So I
Those
think
babies up
it
at the
is having
legislature.
those babies over at the legislature. So boy, am I going to get in trouble for this. So I think paying attention to those communities and having
Right.
as much conversation with those communities is really important. I also think the other interesting thing that you sort of alluded to is that I think a lot of these questions, if we can, I'd say agree, but that's obviously the wrong word. But if we can agree at what is morally a true north, or where our values are, then the reality is the fight of the LGBT community and the fight of Black Lives Matters is really the same fight, right? I mean, it's really about how do we avoid discrimination? How do we make sure that people are being treated equally? How do we make sure that young Black men in Chicago are not being shot while they're
Right.
turning around and raising their hands, right? I mean, it's all of these things. And so if we can find, even though they're expressed through those different groups and expressed in different ways, that's sort of, I think, what it to get grassroots organizing working. And so if we can find what is that base moral value that we're really after, which I would say let's start it with just basic human equality and rights, is then built upon, whether that's through a Black Lives Matter movement or through the LGBT community or the Asian community, and now obviously the focus on how many horrible Asian hate crimes we have going on. So I think there's a lot of this stuff comes down to the same sort of soil, right? And we're just trying to
Right.
figure out how do you make people understand that and want to get activated in it,
And I
if
think
I'm answering your question at all.
I think you are. Was very general and broader than, uh, but I think we're at a point, and the bad about this is that it affects us all in a very heavy, concentrated manner. But the good about this is it's a lot for us now to disclose and work on and actively look at it clearly in front of everybody. The doors have opened up now, the conversation is broader, and the perspective is if we can make something better for one person, we can make something better for the other person. And I think that that's the process that we need to be in. I tell people, and I say, what's the difference in a poor Black man and a poor white man? And I get people going, because they think it's a quiz of secret question. I said, wow, it's taken all of that from you to come up with nothing. So if that's the case, then that's what we ought to fix. And if we fix that, then we fixed it for everybody. If we walk in the room trying to pick out what we're going to fix for who, we're going to find that that person's mind could change, that person's attitude can change, because with life comes knowledge and wisdom and experience. And those things often make people different. I used to get asked years ago, why was I close to Orrin Hatch? And I said, because he's my friend. Says, Orrin Hatch is your friend? I said, yes, he is. Wow. Do you know what he's like? I said, yes. He calls me. He says hello. He thanks me when I do something with him. He comes over to my house. He's my friend. And that's how I leave it. And they walk away scratching their heads. I said, your perception of what something is has nothing to do with the intelligence of what something is. So learn about it in order to be about it. So I think that's a lot of what both of you are saying, even though the good doctor has classified all our legislators as children, you know,
Yeah,
Oh, good.
it was
Attribution goes to you.
as a pediatric
Awesome.
professional, that's my professional.
There you go.
And you just,
Hey, James, one thing I want to jump back in and say though, and I'm sorry, I don't want to dominate this, but I want to go back to something you just said, which I think is really important, which is if we can improve one person's life, how can we expand that and improve the next person's? I don't remember exactly how you said that.
Right.
But what's so important about that in today's environment, I think, is that we've gotten into this culture, and I will say I personally believe that is a culture dominated by one side of this fight, is that, or this argument or whatever you want to call it, is that too many people right now look at if we can make this person's life better, by definition, we're making somebody else's life worse.
Right.
And it's the idea that public policy or human existence is a zero-sum game is stupid. And so part of what I think we have to be talking about, right, is how do we, just because you make somebody in the African American community better off or give them an equal opportunity doesn't mean you're taking that opportunity away from somebody else, right? I mean,
Right.
this whole notion that we've turned this into, if you get something, I lose something, it's got to stop.
Absolutely.
I don't know what the solution is, but it's got to stop.
The solution is making sure everybody has something, and that's the way it is. I belong. When I grew up a few years ago, I, my community in San Francisco was made up of a collage of different ethnic groups, and we loved it. There was a bakery on the corner. Well, we've taken all of those things out of our disadvantaged communities. There's no grocery stores, there's no banks, there's a whole lot of things that they have to go somewhere else to get and do, and therefore there's no economic drivers in those communities. I had a paper route, I worked at the bakery, I cleaned a laundromat. There was ways that I could stay in my community, work and earn money, thus spending that money in my community, that we've taken out of the community. Crime has risen in those communities because nobody's watching over them, because everybody has to go to work. So there's nobody there to take care of the community. So we've got to build those kinds of things. Aging, everybody gets older. And yet we have to wait to talk about what's affecting our aging population as if this group or that group does not get older. And I go, wait a minute. Tomorrow you're a day older, the next day you're 2 days older, you're going to get older. You find your policies have to kind of embrace the fact that you've got to make sure these policies not only are good for today, but they are good for tomorrow. Do you go into the room with that in your mind, is that we have to have some longevity in the things that we're deciding to do? And I'm going to ask you the same question, Dr. Cosgrove. How do you build something now that's needed now and hope that it will last for another day? How do you do that?
Well, I think the framework has to always be there, which goes back to your comment of if something is good, or your comment and the one I commented on, right? If something is good for somebody, that hopefully it's good for more people. It doesn't have to be, that doesn't mean it's bad for somebody else. And so
Right.
I think when we look at these issues, most of them, quite frankly, are, age independent. Some are, of
Right.
course, because the aging community has different issues than, pediatricians are dealing with infants or young children. But
Right.
I think that if you look at least the kind of policies that we tend to look at, so if you're looking again at Medicaid expansion, right? I mean, that's a pretty age independent question. It's do people need healthcare coverage, and how do you get it for them? If people need access to the ballot box, and look at what's happening across the country. Thankfully, so far, not really here, but look what's obviously happening in Georgia, Texas, other places that are now restricting voting rights. Well, that you could look at that as a question of, are they trying to disenfranchise the African American community in Georgia, or are they inadvertently, even if it's inadvertent, disenfranchising the elderly community who, can't get to a ballot box as
Right.
easily. And so maybe they need the access to early voting and to drop boxes and to people who can come and pick up their ballot, all the things. So, the good news is on that front, Utah happens to be, I think, pretty good. But so I would say the answer to that for me is that we're looking again, if that foundational value system and the morals on which you're building those policies are sound, then they ought to be, in most cases, pretty age independent and really apply from cradle to grave.
Well, and I agree with that, because I believe that even as we look at Medicaid, Medicare, and the cost of medicine and prescription, affordable housing, assisted living, you might stick that over there. That's the older group, but the daughters, the sons, the nephews, the nieces are going to have to take care of those mothers, fathers, uncles, and brothers. So no matter how far to the right that might be, this group over here is still going to be affected by it. So if we correct it and work it out, it's going to minimize the burden that's on the young people, because now instead of having to pay out that money that they've earned to take care of their mothers, fathers, or uncles, they can save it and they can better preserve what's going to happen to them when they get older. Does that make sense?
It does.
Absolutely.
Hey, James, I'm gonna
Dr. Cosgrove, you
throw
want
another
to?
metaphor in here, and this may come out wrong because I'm just thinking of it now. So I apologize in advance. But when you think of the effect on a society, it's affecting sort of what's in the air. If there's fear in part of our society, there's fear in the air that contaminates that everybody who's breathing that air, so that the whole community becomes more fearful. If there's anger in the community, the whole community, in a pocket of the community, there's anger that permeates throughout the whole community. And I'm thinking that the converse is also true. If we can improve the lives of some, we increase the happiness that's in the air that we breathe, and we as a community become a touch more happy versus a touch more fearful. And so everything that helps any of us, in fact, I think helps all of us. And anything that hurts any of us hurts all of us. And Josh just thought about, the zero-sum game thinking is a failure of imagination, and it's a persistent failure in a lot of decisions that our society makes, not just our legislator, but throughout the society. And I think we need to be, when we see a zero-sum thinking, we need to call it for what it is, of oversimplification and not wrong, not a challenge them at stupid, but incomplete thinking. And that we need to, because I think that's a perverse idea that's influences an awful lot of decisions. And I do think we ought to, as a community, celebrate the accomplishments of any small group as an accomplishment of the whole, because they are so interconnected that we shouldn't really see it as anything other than a celebration. I mean, the whole should celebrate every little accomplishment for any. And yeah, that didn't come out exactly right, but I think there's some merit and some wisdom in there somewhere.
Well, I'm going to leave this discussion and go back and open up the dictionary and kind of find out what stupid means, and so I can use it appropriately in my next conversation. So that's a good thing. Gentlemen, I thank you so much for spending this time with me. Josh, I want to do this with you regularly, so I would have you look at the calendar. I want to connect you with other people because I think you're a wise young man. My doctor friend here.
Emphasis on young.
You can't jump in on my conversation like that. You know what I mean, Josh? You got to let me finish my statement. You know what I mean? You really was going for that real quick. And I sensed a little apprehension when I said young. Don't worry, I'm there for you. My show is all about helping the aging. So you got me, brother. Don't worry about it. But thank you both for joining me. This has been, we haven't covered nearly enough, but I want to stay with you to make sure we look at the advocacy and the things that you guys are doing so that if I can become a voice or at least a megaphone for your thoughts, your ideas, and what your organizations are doing, I would love that very much. And I am so grateful that we have you living with pride for a better Utah and kids that are legislators.
Well, thank you so much for having us, and it's great to be with you both.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you very much. You have a great day. God bless you both. And thank you. Thank you. Thank you.